Hello, everyone. Hello, I'm Susan Cole.
And I'm Matthew Hodson.
And welcome to the Pride special of aidsmapCHAT, our show for people living with HIV from all around the world.
Yep, and we're live now, and we've got some wonderful guests coming on the show today. We have Dr. Demetre Daskalakis of the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Some of you may know him from his Instagram account. If you don't, if you have tastes like mine, I heartily recommend it. It will keep you thirsty for hours. We have Cecilia Chung. She's a world-famous trans HIV activist. She's based in San Francisco. And she is one of the most powerful trans advocates that we have, and she's going to be fantastic to speak to her. And we have someone who, when the law didn't suit him, he changed it. Jason Jones. He successfully challenged the homophobic legislation in Trinidad and Tobago, and he won. So it'd be really exciting to have him on for our very special Pride edition of aidsmapCHAT.
Well, it's so exciting, and it's
I have a
your
prop.
disappear. Yeah, Matthew's going to do that all the way.
Yeah, this is how it's going to be for the next half hour.
That's not distracting
at
all.
I'm done.
So, Matthew, how have things been since we were last on for you? Any changes?
Well, my hair's got a bit longer. This is, I think, the longest I have been without a haircut since I was a teenage goth, probably.
Oh my God.
So I'm starting to develop my lovely little Carol Brady bits at the back, which I'm really enjoying. And soon I will be able to walk around with it, covering my eyes, and then I won't have to engage with anyone, which will be super fun.
Brilliant.
How are you doing? How are you doing?
I am great. I know lots of our viewers were quite concerned about the absence of fast food for me, but I have to say, since the last show, I have had McDonald's, KFC, Burger King, Pizza Hut, and Taco Bell. So I am putting on some weight, but I'm sure it's just the meds.
Right, yes, I'm sure it is the meds, and we are now the most branded show since the Grand Prix, I think. So, and yet still no food packages. I don't know what that's about.
So it's our Pride special.
It is, yeah.
What does Pride mean for you?
Well, so this year it's 51 years since Stonewall, and I think it's one of those years where you're very conscious that Stonewall was a riot, and that at the heart of that riot were Black trans women fighting alongside lesbians, fighting alongside gay men. And I guess when you reflect on what's happened since, and even just recently, so in the last week or so, we've had, actually quite a surprising decision, I would say, from the Supreme Court of the United States of America, where they actually ruled that you couldn't discriminate, you couldn't fire someone for being lesbian or gay or bisexual or transgender. Now, considering the current administration in the US, that was a bit of a shock decision, but one that I heartily welcome. And then there was also just a couple of days ago in Gabon, the lower half of the parliament actually voted down some legislation which criminalized sexual acts between men. So you see these kind of wonderful examples of really positive progress. At the same time, there was recent reports of Lgbt Refuge in Uganda being raided. We still have 73 countries that criminalize sex between men or sex between women. We've seen trans rights being eroded in Hungary and Puerto Rico. In Poland, I was talking to a colleague in Poland just today, and he was talking about how the fear and the hatred of LGBT has been ramped up. And even here in the UK, we have real concerns about what's going to happen with the Gender Recognition Act. So what I would say is we have to remember that Stonewall was a riot, and we need to hold onto that activism. We need to hold onto that fighting spirit, because our rights and our equality are not safe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gay rights.
Absolutely. And have there been any stories relating to that that's caught your attention recently? In aidsmap, that great site for accurate news and information.
Well, I mean, if we're going to talk about, I mean, I guess we've got to talk about COVID because this is the big thing that's gripping us. And there was a study which we reported on just recently. It was a survey of gay men. Hey, gay rights. And in that survey, which was done via dating, it was people were recruited via dating apps. And it was about 1 in 4 gay men in that survey had sex whilst under lockdown with a casual partner. Now, that may sound a lot, but as I say, people were recruited via dating app sites. So basically, people were on a site where people normally meet to hook up. And if only 1 in 4 of those people had actually hooked up during that period, then that's quite low. And half of those people had only hooked up with one person. Now, obviously, that's some greater risk than the government was advising. But, we've had kind of complicated messages from the government. I mean, Susan, do you feel really clear on what the guidelines are right now?
Well, it's something about 1 meter plus.
Yeah,
so
I mean, and
a little confusing.
I mean, as a gay man, I think, considering how many gay men I know who seem to have no idea what 8 inches looks like, I'm really quite concerned that, that we're trusting them to judge what 1 meter or 2 meters looks like. Yeah. I think it's complicated. And I think, that what we're going through at the moment is that process where we work out what we think is risky enough. And I guess for myself as a gay man, I think for lots of people who've been kind of, living with HIV and living within that world, actually that kind of determining what's safe enough and what is, the best sex with the least harm. In this case, what's the best socialization with the least harm? I mean, these kind of harm reduction strategies and these risk minimization strategies have been a part of my life for so long that it's now interesting to see how the world adapts to all of that.
Oh, absolutely. And if only we had an icon of the LGBT community who can talk about some of these issues.
You know what? I think we may just have one of those. I really hope we do. I think we may have more than one of those.
We may have 3.
But first of all, I think we have Cecilia Chung joining us. Brilliant. Hello, Cecilia.
Hi, Matthew. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Cecilia.
You were the first transgender woman and the first Asian to be elected to lead the board of directors of the San Francisco Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual and Transgender Pride celebration. Is that right?
Yes, that's kind of like prehistorical, I think. Like 20 years ago, exactly. Yes.
When you were a child, clearly.
When I was a child, yes.
Cecilia, I'm so glad you were able to come on. I mean, I mentioned the Supreme Court decision recently. What was that a surprise for you? And do you think that's going to make a real difference to LGBT communities?
Yes, I think that it's definitely a surprise, to see that decision coming from, the current composition of the Supreme Court, but also the Friday before, the Trump administrations also have announced, new rules to allow, to give permissions to health facilities and establishments to discriminate against, LGBT people and women, simply based on religious belief. So I think that that's going to be, a lot of work that we need to sort out to figure out whether this is a good thing or a bad thing.
Right.
Absolutely. And Cecilia, it was incredible to see on TV. Was it 15,000 people march for Black Trans Lives Matter? I know that Black trans people are just face such horrendous violence. How important is the movement, would you say?
I would say that it is absolutely crucial to see that kind of turnout, because as you know, the trans community is not really that large. So it really relies on allies and friends and families to show up, to support us. 15,000 is history. I don't think that there's ever been any trans event or rallies that have so big of a turnout.
And it was fantastic because they all wore white, so it was such a striking visual to see all these kind of people thronged. It was like a Robert Zemeckis film.
Yeah, chances are most of them are heterosexual also. So and they're like chanting Black Trans Lives Matter. That's
good on the straights. It's nice that they got something right for a change.
Yay, thanks.
Yay, Susan. Yeah, speak for your people. I should just say that there is there's a march in London on Saturday. It begins at Wellington Arch at 2:00, and it finishes with speeches at Downing Street at 3:00 for Black Trans Lives Matters, and it's organised by the London Black Lives Matters movement. So if you feel safe and secure, they've asked people to wear masks and carry flowers. But sorry, that was a distraction because you're not in London. But you've got, as you've admitted, you've got decades of HIV activism and LGBT activism under your belt. And we're seeing new civil rights movements really grow and flourish right now. Do you think there are lessons from the HIV and LGBT activism that are going to be pertinent to Black Lives Matter?
I think that actually the Black civil rights movement have been going on for a long time as well. I think that there's definitely things that we can learn from one another. And I think that this is also a time to talk about intersectionality because, there are Black LGBT community members, just like there are Black LGBT immigrants. And so we can't just compartmentalize issues anymore. And so we need to build more solidarity across different movements. I think that this is one of those opportunities.
Fabulous. I think so too. Cecilia, it's been such a joy to have you on the show. It's been really, really lovely to see you again.
Thank you for having me. Happy Pride.
Soon.
Yes.
Happy Pride.
Take care.
Happy Pride.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Wow. There's another news story which I think we have to talk about. And that is that when we were last on the air, we were saying, well, there's been no evidence whatsoever that people with HIV are more likely to have a severe impact if they contract COVID. Now, there is one study which has come out since then, which we've reported on the aidsmap site. It's from South Africa. It's from the Western Cape region. And there they saw that people with HIV in this particular cohort were 2.5 times more likely to die than people without HIV. Now, that association wasn't actually as strong with HIV as it was with other conditions, such as diabetes. If they had well-controlled diabetes, they were still 4 times more likely to die. And if they had uncontrolled diabetes, then it was a much, much greater risk. I think that for me, this says a couple of things. One, it's evidence that the situation is evolving, and we need to continue to look at the data to see what the risks are. It's still a commonsensical assumption that people who've got well-controlled HIV probably aren't at that much greater risk. And within this study, it didn't control for poverty, and it didn't control for smoking. And those are two big risk factors that we've seen elsewhere in the world. So, I think we've got to accept that there may be limitations to the data that we have in this case, but it does mean that we need to keep alert and not wanting to use the government expression, doesn't mean it like that, but we need to keep alert and we need to remain engaged with the data so that we can accurately reflect what the risks are to people living with HIV, just as we would hope to accurately reflect what the risks are to all populations.
Absolutely. And I know that Black people living with HIV are particularly concerned because I know there was a study at King's, a very small study that showed that Black people living with HIV were having a worse reaction to COVID. So hopefully we'll get some more data in relation to that.
Yes. Right, and talking of data, let's get on Dr. Demetre Daskalakis. I hope he's able to join us.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Demetre. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you? Happy Pride, Matthew and Susan.
Happy Pride. Now, Demetre, I did tease you already before you joined the studio recording about your amazing Instagram, but we'll get onto that later. Let's talk serious health
later.
Stuff. Because you know, although you are,
I just have to compete with your amazing Twitter.
Although you are a world famous underwear model, you are also incredibly important, and you know, you inspire me with your work in public health. Yeah, I think it's just incredible what New York City is producing. Now, obviously, New York was particularly badly hit by COVID. So, I mean, how is the city kind of responding to coming out of lockdown? I talked earlier about gay men in the UK and how kind of there was sex still going on, but I think people are still very nervous. How is it in New York? You're a bit ahead of us.
Yeah, no, I think that we're, you know, one of the jurisdictions in the U.S. that's being extraordinarily cautious about leaving our lockdown with a very sort of slow-tempered, phase-wise approach. But when it comes to sex, we were really, I guess, on the vanguard in New York City about putting out guidance around safer sex in the age of COVID. And, you know, as an important reference point, we really used an HIV milestone, a benchmark, to create that guidance, which was the guidance that came out in 1983 during the beginning of the epidemic of HIV in New York City by the community, Michael Callan, specifically of Callan Lord, a big clinic in New York City that focused on how to have sex during epidemic. And so we modeled after that and have really tried to evolve our messaging as the pandemic has evolved. So we started off pretty conservative-ish, saying that people should try to avoid hooking up, but if they did, some ideas of how to be safer. But then we've really gotten to the point of saying, like, at this point, with no end in sight in the pandemic, we're assuming that people are going to have sex. And so coming up with strategies that will reduce harm from the COVID perspective while still maximizing people's desire for pleasure. It's been really interesting. And also it's been like amazingly well received to sort of actually be like frank and open, way different than the 80s. Public health wasn't so frank and open. It's sort of refreshing to see what happens when we take a page out of the community book and try to do it ourselves. So it's been a great response in terms of strategies to maintain safety. So I mean, we're coming out of it. We're not out of the woods. And we're watching our indicators like hawks.
Yeah. Demetre, we've seen like shaming of people who aren't wearing masks. How effective do you think shaming is in public health?
Yeah. Ask the HIV guy that question, huh? Completely useless. Shaming just, I mean, we know from HIV and from every other disease that shame just drives things deeper underground. And so, you know, if you have someone not wearing a mask in a park, you have the opportunity to use a social distancing ambassador to actually hand them a mask. But if the shame is so great that everything is pushed indoors, even worse, and underground, then it all sort of falls apart. So I think, you know, much like other protective equipment with other diseases, it's just protective equipment. And so like the idea of shaming people not wearing it or actually shaming folks who aren't necessarily adhering to the letter of the law from the perspective of social distancing is only going to make it worse. In fact, we just released guidance around that too, that has a whole section about not shaming people who are deciding to have social interactions, since it's only human to actually want to interact in person. So I think shame, it's not going to work for this either.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's so important that we get that message out, because I mean, it's very human to kind of want to criticize, especially if you've like kind of taking all the precautions yourself, but it isn't good public health.
No.
Now, there's one thing I've just got to ask you about, because you know you were awarded the Nasty Pig Hero Award, and
coming and coming.
You know, so I just want to know what does that particular honor mean to you?
It just means that I was on a lot of people's email, like it was very sweet. So the two gentlemen who own that company during the darkest part of this pandemic were extraordinarily supportive of me, and actually I talked to them a lot about the guidance that we were writing, and so I think that they that captured their imagination, and there I am, the first Nasty Pig Hero.
Well,
Yay!
You're always my hero, Demetre.
I'm your Nasty Pig hero.
So it's so great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Wait! I got one more thing. Really important to watch this space because just one before you cycle me away. We're doing a match in New York City of like people living with HIV and the COVID registries as well. So I hope someday soon, Matthew, and Susan, we're going to have some data around a really big experience because my assumption is that we've had a lot of folks with co-infection who have made it through this pandemic. So hopefully more to come from New York City on that as well.
I will be watching that data like a hawk. Thank you so much, Demetre.
Wonderful.
Me too.
All strength for you and have a great Pride.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh,
so
he's so wonderful.
He's so steamy hot. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, but Matthew, I think, did I see you in the Independent newspaper by any chance?
Yeah, so
that
I was in an article about the sexual allure of daddies. Okay. Well, if we need to talk about that anymore, let's talk about health and HIV drugs and COVID. Because there's been a new paper that's just come out, and there's still I hear this the whole time. People say, "Oh, well, I'm on PrEP, or I'm living with HIV and I'm on HIV medication, and I think it protects me." And the evidence base for this is so weak. So I just, so there's a new paper come out. We've just reported on it, but there doesn't really seem to be that strength of evidence that says that HIV drugs do help against COVID. And so please, if you're on HIV drugs, whether for PrEP or for treatment, don't think that you're protected. Don't think that you're going to be immune, and don't think that you'll necessarily have a milder infection if you do get it. It's early days. We might find something later on. It's not new to repurpose drugs, but there isn't the data there yet. So that's a little bit of health stuff for you there.
Yeah.
Now let's get someone on the show who has been a complete hero, who has changed the law. Jason Jones.
Jason Jones, hello.
Hi, everyone.
Wonderful to have you. Is that a Trini flag I see behind you and in front of you?
We have some people from Trinidad and Tobago watching, and I believe also a friend from Barbados. So we have a big Caribbean audience this afternoon.
Wonderful. I'm wearing my Guyana bracelet, being the hybrid Guyanese Jamaican person that I am. So wonderful.
And as a nod to our Prime Minister Boris Johnson, I'm a tank top bum boy proudly.
I'm delighted to see you absolutely fulfilling the stereotype. I think everything that wise man says.
Jason, you have been my hero for ages, and I think it's absolutely extraordinary what you went through and what you achieved, actually overturning the law in Trinidad and Tobago about criminalization of gay people. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, as a former colony of Britain, we had the old British colonial era buggery law, which of course was decriminalized in the United Kingdom in 1968. And unfortunately, we had a very big constitutional challenge to remove the law because the laws were protected under what is called a savings law clause and just couldn't be challenged. Very luckily, my legal team were able to find a loophole in the law to be able to challenge it. And that was up to Peter Laverick, a young gay lawyer here in Britain. And we managed to do it. And interestingly enough, the law didn't only criminalize consensual adult same-sex intimacy between men. There was also another section within the Sexual Offences Act that criminalized acts of lesbianism between women. And I challenged that as well. So I'm seen as an honorary lesbian in my quarters.
Wonderful. And how have things been in Trinidad and Tobago since? Any updates?
Well, I think if you look online at the video, the celebration that happened on the steps of the court that day, From that moment, the trajectory has just been incredibly upwards. 3 months later, they held the first ever Pride March, public Pride March down the streets, just in 3 months. I mean, that just shows you the power that something like that had. In fact, in the court judgment, Justice Rampasar did see these laws as being the sword of Damocles hanging over the heads of LGBT people. And since then, the movement has moved enormously forward, so much so that Domestic Violence Act, an amendment was proposed to recognize same-sex relationships. That would have never happened before this judgment in 2018. So it's caused huge ripples in society. And when I go home now, I'm very honored to, be met by people in the street, seeing me as a hero for the nation.
Oh, you are a hero. Fantastic. And I mean, I think it's really interesting because, I mean, obviously a lot of the homophobic legislation all around the world is actually a remnant from our colonial past. And I think it's, at the moment we're going through a process of confronting our colonial past, and the ramifications of that are huge. I think it's fantastic that it's such an honor to have you on the show for what you've done, for what you've achieved. And not only that, I hear you've been raising funds to support trans and HIV positive people who've been hit by COVID in Trinidad and Tobago. So how much, what's the goal? What's the target here?
Well, I'm based in London, and I go backwards and forwards. But I saw somebody from Pakistan, resident in London. They did a Just Giving crowdfunding campaign for trans people in Pakistan. So I reached out to a fantastic trans woman who is head of the Trinidad and Tobago Trans Coalition, Brandy Rodriguez. I said, Brandy, can I do something like that for you? What can I do to assist? And in conversation with her and members of the United Caribbean Trans Network, I found out that things were incredibly difficult for trans people. Over 90% of trans women in Trinidad and Tobago are sex workers, and over 50% of those sex workers are HIV positive. And of course, through COVID-19 and the lockdown, they were not able to earn their crust of bread. And of course, many of them have been excommunicated from family. Many don't have friends. Many are refugees from Venezuela. So I had to broaden the whole scope of my assistance. I reached out to Frontline AIDS, a fantastic organization based here in the United Kingdom who have assisted me in the past. And I said to them, listen, we have this problem. How can we help? And we managed to raise $16,500, which is a huge sum. And over the last month, the program has already started. Over the last month, we have led over 35 people to food, paid partial rents, spoken to the landlords so they're not made homeless, and navigated them back onto HIV medication because many of them couldn't get to their clinics. And this has now blossomed into a 3-year program called PATN, P-A-T-N, and PATN is going to be looking at HIV positive people in Trinidad and Tobago and navigating them back onto full adherence to medication so they can fulfill the U equals U and hopefully bring down infection rates. Unfortunately, the Caribbean is the region second highest in the world for HIV infection rates. We are only second to sub-Saharan Africa. So it's a very serious situation there. And the correlation between criminalization and HIV infection is huge. In countries that criminalize, 1 in 4 MSMs are HIV positive. In countries that don't criminalize, the figure drops to 1 in 15. So there's a direct correlation between these discriminatory laws, even though they are not actually enforced, and higher infection rates, higher HIV infection rates.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. You're doing such extraordinarily important work, and I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. Well, we're about to launch a new human rights organization that will be based in Trinidad and Tobago. I've had this dream for 4 years now, and it's finally come to fruition. The organization will be based in Trinidad and Tobago, and it will look at all human rights. What people have to realize is all of these things, as Cecilia said earlier on, are interconnected. All discrimination comes from the same place. So the organization will look at all human rights. We'll be looking at women, gender-based violence. We'll be looking at children. We'll be looking at refugees. We have over 50,000 refugees who have come to our shores for safety. And we'll also have international desks. We will have desks in London, Toronto, New York City and Miami, where there are large Caribbean populations. Again, there are over close to 250,000 people from the Caribbean region who live outside of the region. So that's an untapped group of people that can be helping this work happen back in the Caribbean. So I'm very proud to announce that they have named the organization after me, which is a huge honor. I'm very, very, very thrilled. It's called the Jason Jones People's Foundation.
It's only fitting, Jason. You've absolutely earned it. We have to wrap up because I'm getting messages from the studio, but it's been such an honor to have you on the show. The Jason Jones Foundation, is it? We will be looking out for it. Have a brilliant Pride. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jason. I can't believe we've run out of time.
It goes like nothing. Where does the time go?
So we're gonna.
Is that stupid umbrella?
I know we're gonna have a little bit of a break, but we will be back in 2 weeks' time with aidsmap Live with me. Not you.
Not me.
Not you. You're going to be behind the scenes, but we're going to be focusing on the world's largest HIV conference, AIDS 2020, with guests chatting about the most important news stories from there. So do join us then.
Yeah, that's going to be fantastic. I want to thank everyone who's been on the show. So Cecilia, Demetre, Jason, all the crew at Disruptive. Susan, you're a goddess as always, and I've really missed this. So have a brilliant Pride, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye. Gay rights.